Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into the anatomy of a crime, specifically the famous case of the red-headed leak. We're going to break down exactly how Sherlock Holmes takes basic, seemingly mundane, everyday observations to unravel an incredibly elaborate criminal plot. Let's get right into it. So, imagine this. Would you take a completely bizarre job simply because you have red hair? Well, a timid, red-haired pawnbroker named Jabez Wilson did exactly that. Picture this highly distressed client practically bursting into Holmes's apartment with one of the wildest stories you could possibly hear. He's a regular shopkeeper who was just offered a highly unusual opportunity, and literally his only qualification for the role? Having bright, fiery red hair. It sounds completely absurd, right? But as you're going to see, this was actually the very first piece of a seriously dark and brilliant puzzle.
We really have to start by contrasting our rather naive victim with his incredibly cheap assistant, Spaulding. So on one side, you have Jabez Wilson, a guy who really just wants to run his pawn shop in peace. On the other side is his assistant, Vincent Spaulding. Now, Spaulding is the one who magically spots this newspaper ad for the Red-Headed League and aggressively pushes his boss to apply. But here is the absolutely glaring detail you can't ignore. Spaulding was happily working for half the standard wages. I mean, why would a clever, capable young guy undervalue himself so drastically? Just keep that question in your back pocket for a second.
Because you see, this wasn't just some quick overnight scam. It was a highly elaborate 8-week stunt. Wilson gets the gig, which pays a very handsome £4 a week. And his duties? Literally just sitting in an empty office for 4 hours a day, manually copying the Encyclopedia Britannica. Mind-numbing, right? But he does it faithfully, week after week, until one morning he shows up and the office is just abruptly closed. There's a simple note on the door saying the league has been dissolved. Poof! Gone! And it's this sudden, totally bizarre ending that completely spooks Wilson and drives him straight to Sherlock Holmes.
All right, so that brings us to investigating Saxe-Coburg Square and the process of actually gathering the clues.
Now that Wilson is out of a job, Holmes is on the clock. He immediately heads out to do some on-site reconnaissance outside the pawn shop. But Holmes being Holmes, he doesn't just casually look around. He systematically tests his environment. First, he whacks the pavement outside the shop with his walking stick. Then, he knocks on the shop door, not to interrogate anyone about the case, mind you, but simply to ask the assistant, Spaulding, for directions to the Strand. And right after that, he makes a point to inspect the road directly behind the square. To his partner Watson, this all looks completely erratic. But to Holmes, this is pure, calculated data collection.
And that brief interaction at the shop door? Yeah, Holmes wasn't looking at Spaulding's face at all. He was looking straight down at his legs. Think about it. A pawnbroker works behind a counter. It's a clean, indoor job. Yet Spaulding's trouser knees were absolutely filthy, which forces the ultimate question, why on earth would a pawnbroker's assistant have dirty knees? This is honestly the beauty of this entire case. The most damning piece of evidence is literally nothing more than some dirt in a very unusual place.
Well, that dirty clue actually leads us straight to our next critical location, the strong room. You see, a strong room is essentially a room in a bank designed specifically to protect highly valuable items against fire and theft. While Watson was just looking at a run-of-the-mill pawn shop, Holmes's inspection of the road out back revealed a massive, incredibly vulnerable target, a bank. And obviously, banks have strong rooms. Holmes instantly connects those dirty trousers to the physical geography of the neighborhood.
And that realization leads us right to the strong room ambush, midnight at the bank.
Imagine the sheer tension here. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Detective Jones from Scotland Yard, and a local policeman are all waiting in absolute dead silence behind these huge wooden crates. Holmes had told Watson to meet him at 10 o'clock sharp that night, and now they are sitting in the pitch black of the bank's underground vault. Watson whispers that it's 11:15 p.m. Holmes quickly shushes him, right? Can't spoil the trap. Then, suddenly, the silence breaks. A sliver of light gleams from the cracks in the stone floor. The heavy stones literally start to move apart. First, a hand with a gun emerges, then another hand, and out climbs Vincent Spaulding, right along with his accomplice.
Holmes instantly leaps from the shadows and disarms the intruder. And then comes the big reveal. You can't get away, John Clay. That's right. Vincent Spaulding is actually the notorious thief, John Clay. With a swift strike to his arm, Holmes sends the gun clattering to the floor. Now, the accomplice, a guy named Ross, who, by the way, was playing the head of the fake Red-Headed League, he frantically scrambles back down the hole. But it doesn't even matter. Holmes just calmly informs Clay that there are 3 more men waiting at the other end of the tunnel. It's a flawless trap, perfectly sprung.
So, the ambush was a total success. But now we need to look at deconstructing the crime, which is basically a deductive masterclass.
Look, catching the bad guy in the act is definitely thrilling, but understanding how he got there, that's the real payoff of this explainer. Holmes's superpower isn't some kind of magical intuition. It's the execution of a perfect investigation, relying entirely on systematic examination. We so often look at geniuses and assume they just have this supernatural sixth sense, but a true investigation is simply methodical. It's taking exactly what you see, asking why, and then relentlessly testing that hypothesis. Let's look at exactly how his mind mapped this whole thing out.
Let's piece these isolated observations together, just like Holmes did. Okay, a smart man happily works for half pay. Why? Well, he must have a strong, hidden motive to be in that specific location. Then Holmes tapped his walking stick on the ground outside, and it sounded solid out front, which meant the shop cellar must stretch backward. The dirty trousers? That assistant was obviously spending hours down in that cellar doing the filthy physical work of digging. And finally, noticing the bank located directly behind the shop, boom. Suddenly, the entire picture snaps into focus. The whole Red-Headed League was just an unbelievably expensive, elaborate distraction designed entirely to get Jabez Wilson out of his pawn shop so John Clay could dig a tunnel straight into the bank's strong room.
Now Watson was completely amazed by all this, and he naturally asked, "But why tonight? How did you know?" And Holmes laid it out perfectly. Step 1, the villains abruptly closed the League's office. That told Holmes they didn't need Wilson out of the way anymore. The tunnel was officially finished. Step 2, they had to execute the robbery on a Saturday night. Why? Well, that brings us to step 3, because the bank doesn't open on Sunday. Breaking in on a Saturday night gave the thieves a massive, completely uninterrupted window of time to clear out the vault and make a totally clean escape. Brilliant, right?
So we wrap up our explainer with this thought to chew on. If one of the greatest criminal mysteries can be unraveled simply by observing a pair of dirty trousers, what crucial details in your own life are you walking right past every single day? The villains in the Red-Headed League thought they had covered absolutely everything. The one thing they failed to account for was a man who practices relentless, systematic examination. Holmes is a phenomenal reminder that the answers to our most complex problems are very often hiding right there in plain sight, just waiting for us to actually look. So next time you're faced with a tricky puzzle, remember the pawnbroker, the half wages, and the dirty knees. Stop just seeing and start observing.